Hi. So, one of the topics that often comes up when we talk about community is polyamory. And part of why it comes up is that it's part of the sort of stereotype that a lot of people have about communities is that everybody's sleeping together. And while there are communities that make it part of their explicit work to be really deeply exploring relationships, and that often includes polyamory for those communities, that's a pretty small percentage of the intentional communities movement. And there's some really interesting things happening in those communities. And one of the things that you find is that you get to really look pretty deeply at what your jealousy triggers are, and that those, particularly when sex is involved, tend to be pretty deep triggers for people. But they also have wider applications, because our jealousy stuff can get triggered with friends and with seeing other people spending time with our children, and that kind of cliquey, almost junior high-ish thing where people find themselves having sort of pockets of friends, and then when a new person comes into that mix, like what happens to the social dynamics, and things can get upset. So the triggers that get explored when you're working with polyamory are triggers that are really worth exploring, because they touch on so many other levels of social relationships. But if you can work on it when there's sex involved, you're doing some really deep work. And so I think that there's a lot of benefits to doing that. And I think one of the things that happens with polyamorous relationships in community is that people are kept more honest, because there's a lot of people who are paying attention to each other and who really care about each other. And if you start behaving in some really wacky way, people are going to notice, and people are going to be like, what's up, and do you need some support with something? And I think that there's an opportunity to explore things also in an environment where people are a lot less likely to kind of take sides in conflicts between any kind of couple, but also within polyamorous relationships and the social support that happens for those, because most people are at least on friendly terms with, if not actually friends with, multiple people that are involved in the polyamorous scene. And so rather than finding divisions getting more created, there's a way that you can really support everybody looking at themselves and looking at how they are in relationship and doing some really deep work. And so I have tremendous respect for the groups that are actually getting in there and really doing some good polyamory explorations. I think it's a great thing. Yeah, so the other thing is when people come in and they don't have a partner, and it tends to be that there's a much smaller pool of people to choose from. I mean, if you're in New York City, you have, a million people to sort of be scoping out as partner prospects. And here, and in a lot of communities, it's a pretty small pool. There may be 10 single people of the appropriate gender for you to be scoping out instead of a whole bunch. And one of the things that, and that sounds hopeless to a lot of people, it sounds like stepping into the desert. The chances, if you pick 10 random people in your life, what are the chances that one of them would really be your partner? And one of the things that I think is important to keep in mind is that if you're part of a community, particularly communities that are mission-based communities that have something going for them that they're working on creating together beyond just we want to have a good neighborhood, is that you tend to have very close values matches, much more so with that small group of people than you would with, so it's the difference between, like, you may not have 150 people to choose from, you've got 10, but those 10 people, it's like they've already been sort of pre-screened to be much more likely to be a good values match for you. So I think that relationships that start in community are often more solid, and you end up with less stuff to sort out later when you're like, whoa, I didn't know you believed that, or I didn't know that that was important to you. That stuff tends to be pre-sorted to some extent. Having said that, for some people, and I think particularly for gay and lesbian people, it can really feel like the desert. That, a lot of people have left community because they were there for 3 years, they felt like it was working really great for them in all ways, except that they never really found a good partner match for themselves, and that's something that they feel like they need in their lives, and they want to fulfill that piece. And so I think that it's, for communities that want to be big, I think that's one of the pressures to get big fast, is so that the partner pool is bigger, and so that people can find what they're looking for in a mate.